What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the fighting game tutorial series, we are going to be going over improving our camera edges by converting them from blueprints to code part 2. So recently in the series we've been covering converting our camera from blueprints to code, and we had one episode on converting our camera edges from blueprints to code, but we need another episode on the camera edges, that way we can finalize everything in the camera. And then our camera will be ready to fully live in the code and we'll be able to make that transfer. So this is the final piece that we have before we're ready to do that. Everything you see in this video should be the same as you're used to because we haven't actually transferred our camera from blueprints to code yet, but we will be. So not much to see here. But before we hop into this episode, if you want to get caught up into the entire series so you can see how we've done things like projectiles, special moves, input buffers, I'll link you to the entire playlist of the fighting game tutorial series right here in the top right corner. Alternatively, if you don't care about that, you just care about creating a fighting game camera in C++, then this is the perfect place to be. I'll link you to the first episode of the camera though, so that you have a good starting point and you know how we got to this point in the series. That way you can follow along one-to-one. With that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. So this is a code and blueprint tutorial series. Again, we're going to be transferring content from blueprints into the code, so we're going to be in both, but we're really just going to be working in the code today. But for now, we're going to head into Visual Studio. I want to head to my basecamera.h file because the base camera class is what we're going to be spawning when we're finished with the conversion, and our camera class is what spawns the camera edges or our map boundaries. Up to this point, we have been just spawning a basic camera edge. So if I go to my base camera CPP, I can show you we are spawning the camera edge actors. And right here, we were using our base camera edge static class. However, the thing with that is we have a base camera edge counterpart. And when we have a counterpart for our base camera edge, and when we have a blueprint class that we need to set things on or adjust values in, we want to use that blueprint class instead of the code class. So we need a way to know how to spawn the correct camera edge class, which is our camera edge BP. And we can do that by assigning a variable to that class in the base camera. So if we scroll down in basecamera.h, to our variables, I'm making a new one today called camera edge class. It is T subclass of angled bracket a base camera edge angled bracket. So this means any class that is a base camera edge or a child of a base camera edge. Again, our blueprint is a child of our code camera edge, so this would be a subclass of a base camera edge, and we're putting that into the variable camera edge class. This is U property of edit defaults only in blueprint read write. I made it edit defaults only because this means we can assign it in the class defaults of any of these children blueprint, but we can't assign it on the graph. It doesn't have to be that way. You could make it edit anywhere, and that's perfectly fine. In my case, I don't need to change my camera edge class at runtime, so I'm just going to set it one time, and that's that. And I'm making it blueprint read write so we can edit it and access it within the blueprint. So we make this variable, and then we can go into our basecamera.cpp, and I don't assign a value to it in the constructor. It is a subclass that we're going to assign in the camera blueprint. So I leave it alone here, but I go down to my use camera function that we have and go to where we're spawning all of our camera edges. And in front of the get actor location, get actor rotation, I changed all these to camera edge class. So now it looks like this. Left outer edge equals get world spawn actor of a base camera edge, but then in the parentheses, the first parameter is camera edge class, the variable we just made. Get actor location, get actor rotation. This fits an overloaded definition of spawn actor, basically meaning that spawn actor function can take in the specific class type and the location rotation and spawn that specific type. So update this for all your spawn actors for all your camera edges, left, right, outer and inner, and then front and back for our 3D case as well. Once all that is done, then we'll spawn the appropriate class once we set it on the blueprint. We'll do that in our base camera BP. But let's go and update something in base camera edge as well. So if we go to basecamera.edge.cpp and go to the constructor here, there's a couple things I want to change. So first things first, we were not setting a collision type for our components in our camera edge. When we convert this from blueprints, we want to make sure that we have the appropriate default values. Now, again, you can set these in the blueprint themselves, but since we are doing the majority of this in code, I want to just go ahead and set it in here while I can. If you want further modifications on the blueprint, that's fine, but I'm going to set up my collision responses. So the first one, our box collision component, is what actually blocks the players, and that is set to block all in the blueprint. I'll show you this in a few minutes. But since I know this without looking at it, box collision component, set collision response to all channels, and then you pass it the collision response. So E collision response, : ECR underscore block. This is essentially block all, because we're applying block on all channels. Now we have our static mesh component, which was the camera edge visualizer. This is if we want to have a different visualizer than the actual box collision component. So we wanted to see where the camera edges were, but we didn't actually want to make those ones visible, such as for debugging reasons, tutorial reasons, whatever the case may be. This case, this wasn't a blocking collision. I just wanted this to overlap. Static mesh component, arrow, set collision response to all channels, E collision response, : ECR overlap. So overlap on all collision channels. And then also I want to update this static mesh component setup attachment function. We were previously attaching this to the root component, but in the blueprint I was actually attaching the static mesh component or the camera edge visualizer to the box collision component, not to the root component. So if we change the parameters in setup attachment here to take in our box collision component, then the static mesh component will be a child of our box collision component. And that's how we set it up in the blueprint previously, so I want to make sure I keep that hierarchy going forward. Now I'm going to load up the editor. Now the editor is back open, so we can go to our camera edge BP, which for me is in blueprints, functional BPs, cameras, base camera edge BP. But if you go to our box collision component and look at the right hand side under the details panel here, you can see we have the collision, and our collision on the box collision component is set to block all. This is why we're doing it in code, because this is the setup we created in the blueprint, and we want to make sure we're following that. Go through the rest of your settings and make sure this matches as well. For the camera visualizer, you can see the collision is set to overlap all. Again, this is what we're doing in the blueprint for it, so we want to make sure we're doing it in the code as well. So go ahead and make any of those changes. Anything you change for the blueprint, you can set it up in the code here, or if you want, you can leave it on the blueprint, but you'll have to remember to do it when we reparent this blueprint to our base camera edge class in the code. Additionally, I'm renaming this from camera edge to base camera edge BP. There's also one thing we need to do to make sure our tick is actually firing, because our tick is not going to fire if we don't enable tick on the actor. For many things like the character, it already is, but for our camera, which is a camera actor child, it is not enabled by default. So you can see that's what I'm doing here. I have primary actor tick .bCanEverTick equals true in the constructor. I put it as the very top line. That way we know we can tick this actor, and that will allow us to trigger this tick function every frame like expected. The other thing we need to do is set up our camera edge class for that variable that we created in the base camera class. So if we go to our blueprints, functional BPs, cameras, base camera BP, and go to our class defaults, we can look in here for a section that is called camera or base camera, and we can find our variable here, our camera edge class. There will be a drop down, and you can select anything that is a subclass of the type that we supplied it, which is base camera edge. So we can either use our base camera edge class or base camera edge BP. Due to the reasons I mentioned earlier, we want to use our base camera edge BP, the blueprint class. That way we have everything that the blueprint has and everything that we need, regardless of where we spawn it from. Now our camera edge class is almost identical to the blueprint one, except it's in code. I hope you enjoyed this episode on converting your camera edge C++, and you learned from this. Please subscribe. It helps the channel out a lot and lets me know that you're still interested in this sort of content. If you'd like to support the channel and get some extra benefits while you're at it, feel free to check out the Patreon, YouTube membership, and Discord subscription pages to support me and get those benefits. Thank you so much to everyone who has. You guys are amazing. If you ran into any problems while following this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. There's a link in the description, and I would be happy to help you. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.